Hollywood's golden age hid a dark truth. Some black actors didn't just chase fame. They survived it. Tonight, we reveal 25 stars who paid a painful price just to be seen. This is a side of old Hollywood they never wanted you to know. 1. Dorothy Dandridge carried the weight of her brilliance and her pain with a heartbreaking grace. To the public, she was pure radiance, the first black woman to be nominated for a Best Actress Oscar, a trailblazer whose beauty shattered barriers. Yet that very stardom was a carefully constructed illusion, a performance that masked the profound damage of a childhood stolen by abuse and a career built on compromising her own worth. She was celebrated not simply as an artist, but as a symbol, a tragic, exotic object for a world not yet ready to see her full humanity. The exploitation that began in her youth simply evolved as she entered the ruthless landscape of Hollywood. The powerful men who controlled her destiny saw her vulnerability as an opportunity, coercing her into affairs that were less about passion and more about a brutal transaction for career advancement. All the while, the industry relentlessly marketed her as the tragic mulatto sex symbol, a role that cannibalized her real-life sorrows for public consumption. She was trapped in a cruel cycle, forced to perform a version of the pain that the system itself was inflicting upon her. When the spotlight inevitably faded, it left her in a profound and lonely darkness. The roles dried up, the finances she trusted others disappeared, and the accumulated trauma of a lifetime of betrayal became an unbearable weight. Dorothy Dandridge died at 42, broken alone, her death from an overdose of quiet, final testament to a world that adored the image it created but had no capacity to save the woman herself. 2. Hattie McDaniel stepped onto that stage in 1940, a vision in blue and a figure of profound contradiction, to accept an Oscar no black actor had ever held. The honor was historic, a crack in Hollywood's monochromatic facade, yet the victory was steeped in a painful irony that would define her legacy. Even as the industry celebrated her for playing yet another mammy in Gone with the Wind, the black community she represented watched with a mixture of pride and acute discomfort, their applause tempered by the sting of the stereotype she so indelibly embodied. The criticism was not a fleeting thing. It was a persistent, lifelong ache. While she famously retorted with a pragmatic, "I'd rather play a maid than be won," the barbed words of the NAACP in black newspapers cut deep, questioning the very dignity she fought to maintain. She was caught in an impossible bind, vilified for taking the only doors Hollywood was willing to open for a woman of her complexion and size. Each sassy, subservient role was a performance within a performance, a mask of contentment she wore to secure a paycheck and a platform, all while privately wrestling with the resentment of being asked to be grateful for crumbs. Her legacy, therefore, is not one of simple triumph or tragedy, but of a weary, complex pragmatism. She used the narrow space she was given to build a career of considerable wealth and influence, yet she could never escape the ghost of the mammy that clung to her. Hattie McDaniel carved a path with the only tool she had, all the while understanding that her groundbreaking success was built on a foundation that perpetuated the very images her critics rightly wanted to shatter. She was a pioneer who bore the scars of the system she navigated, a woman who won the highest honor only to spend a lifetime defending it. 3. Lincoln Perry, the man who invented Step and Fetch It, crafted a character that made him a millionaire and a pariah in the same breath. With his slow, shuffling gait and a drawl that seemed to take an eternity to form a thought, he became the first black actor to achieve true movie star wealth, a fact as staggering as the persona he sold. In the desperate landscape of the Depression, his was a peculiar form of success, built entirely on embodying a lazy, shiftless simpleton for the roaring amusement of white audiences. He was not just playing a role. He was validating a deeply harmful fantasy, and the studios paid him handsomely for it. What often gets lost in the condemnation is the sheer calculation behind the performance. Perry was a sharp and ambitious businessman who understood the brutal economics of the industry he worked in. He wasn't a fool. He was an actor playing a fool, and he did it with a precision that cornered the market. Yet, this financial victory came at an immense spiritual cost, both for him and for the community he represented. As the civil rights movement gained strength, a generation later would look back in fury, branding him the ultimate Uncle Tom, a man who grew rich by mining the very stereotypes they were fighting to destroy. And so, Stepin Fetchit stands as one of the most complicated and sorrowful figures in American cultural history. Lincoln Perry's story is a bitter parable about the price of admission into a world that never wanted you. He found a way to win by the only rules he was given, yet his victory ultimately trapped him in a cage of his own making. The $1 million and the fame became a curse, an eternal branding that overshadowed the man, leaving behind a legacy that feels less like a triumph and more like a warning. For Lena Horne possessed a radiance that felt both glamorous and guarded, a smile that could light up a screen, but often seemed to hold a world of private calculation. Her beauty was her passport into the upper echelons of MGM, but it was also her prison, carefully managed by a studio that knew exactly how to present a black woman for a segregated America. They kept her isolated in specialty numbers, elegant but disconnected musical segments that could be neatly scissored out for Southern theaters without disrupting the main narrative. She was present, yet purposefully set apart, a breathtaking accessory to the story, but never allowed to truly be part of it. Her most profound personal decision became an extension of this professional strategizing. Her marriage to white bandleader Lenny Hayden was kept a secret for years, a private pact made in a publicly intolerant world. While there was genuine affection, she would later confess with her characteristic blunt honesty that part of the union was career insurance. An alliance with a powerful man in the industry meant protect her fragile standing. This was the painful calculus of her life, where even matters of the heart were weighed against the brutal realities of a career built on the whims of a prejudiced system. For all the fame and the fortune, hers was a career of magnificent compromise. She escaped the crude caricatures forced upon her predecessors, but she was granted a constrained and lonely form of stardom. The glamour was a shield, the poise a form of armor, and while she paved the way for others by sheer force of her dignified presence, the cost was a lifetime of navigating a narrow and carefully policed space. Lena Horne became an icon not through the rich, complex roles she deserved, but through the formidable grace she maintained while being systematically denied them. 5. Nina Mae McKinney arrived with the force of a revelation, her luminous beauty and raw talent blazing across the screen in the early musical Hallelujah. Hollywood, momentarily stunned, dubbed her the Black Garbo, a title that promised a stellar future built on dramatic depth and unparalleled glamour. But the industry had no idea what to do with such a promise housed in a black woman. That initial spark of genuine artistry was quickly, ruthlessly funneled into a narrow and degrading lane, reducing her to a series of hypersexualized hot vixen roles that traded on stereotype instead of substance. She found herself trapped in a cruel paradox, her talent acknowledged only so long as it was used to embody the very caricatures that limited her. The same vitality that made her a star was now a cage, and when she resisted the confines of these parts, the doors of Hollywood simply closed. Refusing to languish, she took her brilliance into exile, finding work in Europe where audiences could, for a time, see her as more than just a sultry novelty. Yet this was a bittersweet salvation, a recognition that came at the cost of her native soil and the major career she deserved. So the title, The Black Garbo, became not a prophecy fulfilled, but a haunting epitaph for what was lost. Nina Mae McKinney's story is one of the great what-ifs of cinema, a trajectory of incandescent potential systematically dimmed by an industry that knew how to exploit her image, but lacked the courage to nurture her genius. She was the first of her kind, a pioneer who mapped a path that ended abruptly at a cliff's edge, her legacy a poignant reminder of the countless voices exiled to the shadows. 6. Paul Robeson stood as a titan, his voice a resonant instrument of both art and activism, his presence a monument of black excellence in a world determined to break him. Yet behind the formidable public figure lived a man forced to compartmentalize his very soul. The same government that feared his radical politics and global appeal meticulously documented whispers about his private life, using the threat of exposing rumored same-sex relationships as a weapon to undermine and control him. His passport, his gateway to the adoring international audiences that sustained him, was revoked, grounding the world's citizen in a nation that treated him as a prisoner. In the face of this relentless pressure, his personal life became another front in a lifelong battle for survival. To protect his public image and shield himself from further persecution, he maintained a marriage that, for many years, was largely a performance for public consumption. It was a strategic fortress, a necessary facade to guard against the homophobic and political attacks that sought to destroy him. This required a profound and lonely sacrifice, forcing a man who sang of freedom to live within walls of his own construction, his private affections hidden in the shadows cast by the spotlight of his fame. The tragedy of Paul Robeson is not one of a man defeated, but of a spirit systematically worn down by the twin hammers of state-sanctioned bigotry and public hypocrisy. He carried the immense weight of representing his race, while simultaneously being forced to erase integral parts of his own humanity. His profound talents and towering intellect were met not with celebration, but with a ruthless campaign to silence him, a campaign that ultimately took a devastating toll. Robeson's legacy is a testament to his incredible strength, but it is also a haunting reminder of the personal cost of living under a gaze that sought to dissect and destroy every part of him. 7. Ethel Waters first found her voice in the vibrant, unapologetic world of 1920s Harlem, where the stages were a sanctuary for reinvention. There, she performed in drag and took on bulldagger roles, her presence a bold and witty subversion of expectations long before such expressions were widely understood. This was a raw, authentic core of her artistry, a woman playing with the contours of gender and desire for an audience that reveled in the spectacle. She carved out a space that was entirely her own, a testament to a complex identity she was forced to later bury. For the journey from the relative freedom of the Harlem nightclub to the glaring scrutiny of Hollywood and national fame demanded a terrible sacrifice. The same woman who once commanded the stage with a sly, gender-bending wit was slowly, systematically reshaped into the nation's Mammy. She became a familiar, comforting, and crucially, a sexual figure in films and on radio. Her sharp edges sanded down into a safe, maternal softness. This public persona was a cage, and inside it, she lived a double life, carefully guarding her relationships with women from a public that would have rejected the truth. So her career became a long, quiet exercise in compartmentalization, a performance that extended far beyond the footlights. The fierce, pioneering spirit of her youth was channeled into a different kind of strength, the endurance required to maintain the facade. In her later years, when she sang His Eye is on the Sparrow with profound, weathered grace, the emotion that poured out felt earned. It was the sound of a woman who had navigated a lifetime of concealment, her true self whispering through the cracks of a character the world had imposed upon her. 8. Fredi Washington possessed a kind of beauty that Hollywood found simultaneously irresistible and deeply unsettling. With her pale skin and green eyes, she delivered a searing performance in imitation of life as a young black woman desperately passing for white, a role that should have launched a stellar career. But for the studios, her very existence became a problem. She had portrayed the tragic passer with devastating authenticity, yet off-screen, she refused to live the lie. Her proud, public affirmation of her blackness in an industry built on racial fantasy was seen not as integrity, but as an inconvenient defiance. The same light skin that got her the role now became a barrier she could not cross. Studio executives, terrified of offending Southern audiences, saw a nightmare scenario, an actress who looked white but identified as black, potentially starring opposite white leading men. They offered her the ultimate betrayal, a real-life invitation to pass for white to secure more work. Her furious refusal to deny her heritage cost her everything, effectively exiling her from the very mainstream success her talent deserved. So Fredi Washington became a different kind of pioneer, one whose legacy is written in the stark outline of a career that should have been. She was a woman trapped in the cruel paradox of an industry that wanted her image but rejected her truth. By standing firm, she sacrificed the spotlight not for a stereotype, but for her very soul, becoming a quiet, formidable monument to a principle that Hollywood was not yet ready to understand. 9. That voice of fluttering, high-pitched tremor exclaiming, "I don't know nothing about birthing babies," became an indelible, if painfully limiting, mark on American culture. For Butterfly McQueen, the line was both a ticket to survival and a lifelong prison. She brought a unique physical comedy to the role of Prissy, a performance so memorable it would forever eclipse the woman behind the caricature. Yet that very success came at the cost of her own dignity, reducing her to a symbol of hysterical incompetence for generations of moviegoers. The truth behind the performance was far more sobering than the fiction. She would later explain with devastating bluntness that she took the part for the most basic of human needs. She was starving. The choice was not between roles, but between humiliation and survival. Every exaggerated whimper and frantic gesture was a transaction, a small piece of her self-respect bartered for a paycheck that would keep her from hunger, a stark reminder of the brutal calculations black performers were forced to make. In the decades that followed, she grew to resent the ghost of prissy that followed her everywhere. She ultimately left acting altogether, finding the parts offered to her so insulting and repetitive that she preferred a quiet life of anonymity. Butterfly McQueen's story is thus a quiet tragedy of art imitating a life of coercion, a testament to how the entertainment industry could simultaneously rescue a person from poverty and imprison them in an image that mocked their very intelligence and spirit. 10. For over 100 films, Louise Beavers offered America the comforting, smiling face of Mammy, her ample frame and endless patience serving as a backdrop for white stars and stories. That smile, warm and seemingly effortless, was in truth a mask worn with a heavy knowledge of necessity. She understood the cruel arithmetic of a system with few opportunities, confiding to friends with weary pragmatism. If I don't do it, some other sister will, and she'll need the money too. Her complicity was not born of ignorance, but of a painful solidarity with the countless other black actresses waiting in the wings, just as hungry, just as trapped. Within those constricting roles, she fought to project a sliver of genuine humanity, a soulfulness that sometimes flickered through the stereotype. Her Mammy was often wiser, kinder, and more grounded than the frivolous white characters she served, a subtle subversion that audiences of color could recognize even if the studios could not. Yet this small victory was a fragile consolation for a career spent embodying a lie, her own considerable talents perpetually mortgaged to the demeaning demands of the era. Her legacy, therefore, is one of profound contradiction. Louise Beavers built a successful career, provided for herself, and even paved the way for others through her sheer presence. Yet she did so by perpetuating an image that limited the very people she sought to help. She carried the weight of that compromise with a quiet grace, her smile both a shield against the world's contempt and a veil for the resignation she must have felt, a woman who fed a nation a comforting fantasy, while swallowing the bitter truth of it herself. 11. Canada Lee was a force of nature, a man whose formidable presence filled every space he occupied, from the boxing ring to the Broadway stage to the silver screen. He was a pioneer who carved out roles of startling dignity and complexity in an industry that offered black men little but caricature. Yet this very prominence made him a target. His outspoken leftist politics and the whispered rumors about his private life placed him squarely in the crosshairs of the House Un-American Activities Committee during the Red Scare, a machinery of fear designed to crush dissent and enforce conformity. The pressure applied to him was immense and unforgiving. To salvage what was left of his career, to simply be allowed to work again, he was forced into the ultimate humiliation. Naming names before the committee, a public betrayal that shattered his spirit. The man who had once fought with such principle was broken into participating in the very system that sought to erase him. The blacklist held firm, and the offers dried up completely, leaving him in exile in his own country, a pariah stripped of his livelihood and his dignity. He died at just 45, penniless and heartbroken, a devastatingly early end for a talent that had once burned so brightly. Canada Lee's story is one of the most brutal indictments of that era, a testament to how a nation can systematically destroy one of its most gifted sons. He was not merely sidelined. He was hunted, cornered, and forced complicity, his legacy becoming a haunting reminder of the personal ruins left behind in the wake of political persecution. 12. James Edwards stepped into the spotlight with a quiet dignity that felt entirely new, a handsome and composed leading man who refused the caricatures that had long confined black actors. His performance in Home of the Brave was a seismic event, a raw and human portrayal of a soldier grappling with trauma and racism that promised to shatter Hollywood's color line for good. He carried himself with the grace and intensity of a star, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed the industry might finally be ready to embrace a black leading man in complex, contemporary roles. But that promise curdled in the shadow of whispers. As his private life drew scrutiny, his status as a bachelor, the rumors of relationships with white actresses that defied the era's brutal social codes, the doors that had begun to open started to slam shut. The roles that should have been his birthright, the logical next steps for a talent of his caliber, mysteriously evaporated. The industry that had briefly celebrated him now gave him the cold shoulder, a silent punishment for living a life that existed outside the narrow, segregated lines it was willing to tolerate. His career became a ghost, a haunting collection of what-ifs. James Edwards did not fade away due to a lack of talent or ambition. He was systematically sidelined, his light dimmed by the very forces of prejudice his breakthrough role had sought to challenge. To see him in his final years, relegated to small parts, is to witness the profound cost of a battle fought just a few years too soon, a reminder that for every barrier broken, there were countless others who were broken by it. 13. Rex Ingram commanded the screen with a voice that seemed to emanate from the very core of the universe, a rich, booming instrument that made his casting as the Lord in the green pastures feel less like acting and more like divine appointment. He brought a gravitas and intelligence to every role, from powerful kings to humble fishermen, becoming one of the most respected black character actors of his era. His professional life was a masterclass in dignified presence, a man who could own a scene with little more than the timbre of his voice and the depth of his stillness. Away from the set, Ingram constructed a life of quiet discretion, sharing his home with male companions in an arrangement that the press of the day met with a concerted and knowing silence. This unspoken pact preserved his public image, but demanded a profound personal compromise. The man whose voice could project to the highest balcony lived a private existence that required its volume to be permanently turned down, a constant negotiation between the man he was and the image he was required to project. His story is thus one of majestic achievement, shadowed by quiet sacrifice. Rex Ingram navigated constraints of his time with immense grace and strategic intelligence, finding success within a system that offered no space for his whole truth. He remains a figure of monumental talent, yet his legacy is also a poignant reminder of the weight carried by so many pioneers, the full, rich lives they lived in a respectful, necessary silence. 14. Lorenzo Tucker was christened the Black Valentino, a title that promised smoldering romance and matinee idol appeal, which he delivered with effortless charm in the vibrant race films of the 1920s and 30s. On screen, he was the epitome of hyper-heterosexual passion, the dashing lead who swept heroines off their feet, his image carefully constructed to fulfill a specific fantasy of black love and glamour for audiences. This manufactured persona was his ticket to fame, a performance that made him a star within the segregated world of black cinema. But away from the Klieg lights, Tucker moved through the electric freedom of Harlem's nightlife, living openly as a queer man in a community that offered a rare sanctuary. In the drag balls and vibrant social clubs, he could inhabit a truth that was entirely his own, a stark and liberating contrast to the straitjacket of his screen roles. This double life was not merely a personal choice, but a necessary act of survival, a strategic separation designed to protect him from the arrest, violence, and professional ruin that would have surely followed had his private life invaded his public image. His legacy, therefore, is one of profound dissonance. Lorenzo Tucker embodied the ultimate silver screen lover, while his authentic self flourished in the shadows, a testament to the immense pressure placed on black artists to conform to rigid social norms. He found a way to exist in both worlds, but the cost was a life partitioned into public fiction and private truth, a brilliant career built upon the quiet sacrifice of having performed a lie in order to simply live his truth. 15. Cab Calloway was a hurricane of energy and style, a performer whose zoot-suited, hip-twisting dynamism at the Cotton Club defined an era of sheer, unadulterated cool. He sold an image of hyper-heterosexual virility, a jitterbugging king surrounded by adoring women, both on and off the stage. The public saw a man with a series of glamorous girlfriends, a carefully maintained facade that perfectly complemented his flamboyant stage persona and kept the whispers at a manageable din. Yet backstage, in the shadowy, vibrant underworld of the jazz scene, other rumors swirled with a persistent energy. Whispers of his bisexuality threaded through the corridors of the very clubs he ruled, an open secret among insiders that never broke through to his mainstream press. This required a meticulous balancing act, a lifelong performance of his own, where his real private life was guarded with a fierce and necessary discretion, protected by the loud, distracting spectacle of his public one. So for all his larger-than-life bravado, Cab Calloway's story is also one of quiet calculation. He mastered the art of deflection, using the spotlight not to reveal, but to conceal, ensuring that the full truth of his person remained a private rhythm, fell but never fully heard above the roaring brass and the adoring screams of the crowd. 16. Woody Strode's magnificent physique and regal bearing made him a natural for the screen, yet Hollywood knew only how to cage such grandeur within the narrow roles of gladiator and noble savage. He was a spectacle of primal power and silent dignity, his body exploited as a symbol of untamed nature, all while his true depth as an actor was often left unexplored. He endured these limitations with a warrior's stoicism, understanding that even a constrained presence was a form of progress. Away from the camera's gaze, he navigated an even more delicate terrain, sharing his life with male partners in an era when such truth could shatter a career in an instant. This private world was maintained with immense discretion, a quiet rebellion against the hyper-heterosexual image his on-screen persona demanded. The man who played the ultimate symbol of raw, untamed masculinity on film lived a reality that required the utmost control and concealment. His legacy, therefore, is one of layered strength. Woody Strode carved a path through Hollywood's prejudices with sheer physical presence and unwavering grace. Yet he carried the silent burden of a double life. He became an icon of rugged individualism on the screen, while his off-screen resilience testified to a far more complex and courageous kind of heroism, forever protecting the quiet truth of his own heart. 17. Avon Long brought an electric, seductive charm to the stage, his gold-toothed grin and sinuous movements defining the role of sport and life in Porgy and Bess for a generation. To the white producers and Broadway audiences, he was the embodiment of a dangerous, immoral allure, a character so convincingly portrayed it became a cage he was expected to inhabit. He performed a specific kind of hyper-heterosexual coolness for the mainstream, a necessary mask that secured his place in the spotlight, while carefully guarding the truth of his world. That truth flourished in the vibrant, hidden spaces of Harlem, where he was not a performer on a scripted stage, but a master of ceremonies in his own right, hosting legendary underground queer parties. In these sanctuaries, behind closed doors, the flamboyant energy he had a temper for Broadway was given full, glorious expression. This was his real life, a world of authenticity and freedom that existed in stark, deliberate contrast to the commodified version of blackness he sold on the Great White Way. His story is a masterclass in code switching, a lifelong performance where the line between a role and a man was deliberately and strategically blurred. Avon Long's brilliance lay not just in his talent, but in his shrewd ability to navigate two separate realities, using the flashy stereotype he portrayed on stage as a shield to protect the rich, complex, and joyous life he built just a few miles downtown. 18. Dooley Wilson immortalized the role of Sam in Casablanca, his tender rendition of As Time Goes By, providing the film's aching romantic heart. He was a loyal confidant of Bogart's Rick, a figure forever positioned at the periphery of a great love story, his own life and love seemingly as mysterious off-screen as they were on. For an actor who created one of cinema's most enduring symbols of devotion, the public record showed a startling void. There were no glamorous dates, no press-approved romances, no narrative for him outside of that piano. The truth, as whispered by friends and carefully guarded by those who knew him, was that he shared his life in Los Angeles with a male partner for decades. In an era where such a reality could destroy a career, their home was a private sanctuary, a world away from the prying eyes of the studio system and a public that was not ready to understand. The man who sang of love and loss with such profound simplicity had to keep the most fundamental chapter of his own love story permanently sealed. So while the world remembers Sam playing again, the real Dooley Wilson was living a quiet truth that his fame could never acknowledge. His legacy is thus a poignant duet. The public performance of a man with no romantic life, and the private, enduring partnership that gave his real life its meaning. He became an icon of nostalgic affection, all while protecting a genuine love that history, for a long time, very nearly overlooked. 19. Clarence Muse carried himself with an air of profound dignity, a pioneering figure who understood that his every role was a statement in the long crusade for black respectability. As one of the first black actors with a speaking role in a sound film, he helped build the very foundation for a dignified black presence in Hollywood, co-writing scripts and advocating for more nuanced parts. His public image was that of a serious, dedicated patriarch, a man whose personal integrity was as unassailable as a professional ambition, all in service of lifting up his race. Yet this carefully constructed image, so vital to his mission, required a monumental personal sacrifice. To protect the Crusaders' reputation he had built, the relationships he had with men were locked away in a chamber of absolute secrecy. The same man who fought so publicly for a fair and human portrayal on screen was forced to live a deeply compartmentalized private life, knowing that any whisper of his truth could shatter the dignified edifice he had worked a lifetime to create. His legacy, therefore, is one of profound contradiction. Clarence Muse paved the way for generations with his talent and unwavering public principle, yet he walked that path alone, bearing the silent weight of truth he could never afford to speak. He became a symbol of black progress, but his story is also a sobering reminder of the immense, hidden costs often demanded of those who are first, their personal truths becoming the quiet, unspoken price of public advancement. 20. Noble Johnson was a man of monumental ambition, a mountain of a man whose vision extended far beyond the roles he was offered. He dreamed of a world where black stories were told by black creators, and with the founding of the Lincoln Motion Picture Company, he built the very first black-owned film studio. This was more than a business. It was a sanctuary, a place where dignity and authentic narrative could flourish away from the degrading caricatures of mainstream cinema. But ideals could not pay the bills, and the financial realities of independent filmmaking were brutally unforgiving. In a move that must have torn at his soul, the pioneering studio owner quietly walked away from his own creation and returned to the very system he sought to bypass. For decades, he became a familiar, fearsome face in white-produced films, playing savage tribal chiefs and silent, hulking henchmen. His formidable presence now used to reinforce the very stereotypes his own company had been founded to dismantle. His story is thus one of the most poignant kinds of failure, the failure of a world to support a better version of itself. Noble Johnson's legacy is split in two: the visionary who briefly held the keys to a kingdom of his own making, and the pragmatic artist who surrendered that dream to survive, his immense talent and strength becoming a mask he wore for a paycheck, all while carrying the quiet weight of what might have been. 21. Juano Hernandez carried himself with an air of inborn authority, his sonorous voice and unwavering gaze marking him as an actor who simply would not be demeaned. He arrived in Hollywood as a singular presence, a Puerto Rican black man of immense talent who consistently refused the subservient and simplistic roles that were the standard offering. He demanded dignity in every part he played, and for a time he succeeded, carving out a space for himself as a figure of wisdom, strength, and unshakable integrity on the screen. Yet his very integrity became its own kind of barrier. Hollywood, while willing to cast him as a patriarch or a judge, remained terrified of presenting a dignified black man as a romantic lead or contemporary everyman. The same qualities that made him groundbreaking also made him, in the eyes of the studio system, somehow untouchable for more complex, human roles. Faced with this unyielding ceiling, he made the difficult choice to exile himself to Europe and Latin America, seeking stages and studios that would see the full scope of his humanity. His story is thus a testament to a particular kind of professional martyrdom. Juano Hernandez paved the way for others by his sheer, unyielding example, but he was ultimately forced to walk away from the very industry he sought to change. He became a legend for his principled stand, yet his career stands as a quiet indictment of a system that could admire a great black actor from a distance, but lacked the courage to truly let him live and love on screen. 22. Robert Earl Jones possessed a rugged, physical presence that seemed carved from the very earth, a quality that destined him for a long career playing laborers, convicts, and shadowy figures on the edges of the narrative. His was the face of a certain kind of weathered working-class reality, but in Hollywood's eyes, it was a face that could seldom be the center of a story. He moved through dozens of films, his talent evident even in the briefest of roles, yet he remained perpetually in the shadows, a fixture in the landscape of stereotype. His personal life was a tapestry of equal complexity, woven with multiple marriages and multiple secrets. Each public union could be read as both a search for connection and a possible shield, a means of constructing a conventional facade in an era that demanded it. Behind this veneer of straightforward domesticity lay a more intricate and hidden truth, a private world of relationships that had to be meticulously concealed to protect the fragile career he had built. In the end, Robert Earl Jones becomes a figure defined by silence, the roles that spoke in cliches and the truths that could never be spoken at all. His legacy is not just in the films he left behind, but in the profound silence he passed on, a silence his son, James Earl Jones, would spend a lifetime filling with one of the most formidable and resonant voices ever heard. The father lived in quiet, and the son would learn to speak for them both. 23. Nick Stewart built his career on a foundation of painful compromise, his voice and persona becoming synonymous with some of the most enduring racist caricatures in American entertainment. As the slow-drawling lieutenant on Amos and Andy, and a performer in demeaning cartoons, he delivered the exaggerated stereotypes that white audiences expected, all while knowing the damage being done. It was a professional bargain with the devil, a way to secure a paycheck and a sliver of visibility in an industry that offered few alternatives for a black actor. Behind the scenes, his life required another, more intimate performance. His public marriage to his wife, Edna, became a carefully maintained facade, a shield to protect him from the dangerous truths of his private life. With her complicity, he hid his relationships with men, their union a strategic fortress against a world that would have destroyed his career and possibly his life had his authenticity been exposed. The man who made a living from broad, public exaggeration had to bury his most genuine self in the deepest shadows. In his later years, Stewart sought a form of redemption, found in the Ebony Showcase Theater to create opportunities for black artists that he himself had been denied. Yet his legacy remains forever split, a poignant reminder of the dual prisons of professional and personal conformity. He was a man who traded in broad, hurtful images for a chance to work, while his own truth remained the most carefully guarded performance of all. 24. Harold Nicholas seemed to defy the very laws of physics on stage, his body a vessel of pure, airborne joy alongside his brother. His acrobatic brilliance and radiant smile created an image of effortless, wholesome entertainment, a narrative the public eagerly consumed. This persona was carefully reinforced by his multiple marriages to women, constructing a facade of conventional heterosexuality that the era demanded of his beloved stars. Yet behind the dazzling sequins and the polished performance, Harold moved to the more clandestine corridors of Hollywood, where his presence in queer circles was an open secret among insiders. His life became a delicate and exhausting acrobatics of identity, constantly balancing the flamboyant freedom he found in private with the sanitized, palatable image he had to project in public. Every gravity-defying leap was mirrored by a careful step in his social life, all to protect a career he had built from the ground up. The price of his immortality as an entertainer, then, was a lifetime of vigilant image management. The man who embodied such breathtaking freedom in his art never truly possessed it in his own life. His legacy remains one of sublime contradiction. A revolutionary physical genius whose most demanding performance was a quiet, continuous act of hiding his true self behind a masterpiece of motion and a megawatt smile. 25. Frederick O'Neal stood as a pillar of principle and purpose, co-founding the American Negro Theater not merely as a stage, but as a sanctuary for black artistry. His was a lifelong, fierce, and dignified battle for equity, fighting to carve out spaces where actors of color could train, work, and be seen with the respect they deserved. He wielded his influence with a quiet determination, becoming a powerful force for change who believed deeply in the power of collective action and institutional integrity. Yet for a man so dedicated to creating spaces of truth for others, his own personal truth remained a closely guarded secret. He never married, and within his inner circle, it was understood that his love was reserved for men, a part of his life that had to be lived with extreme discretion. In an era when exposure could have dismantled everything he built, his private affections became another kind of quiet struggle, a parallel fight for a personal autonomy waged just out of sight. His legacy, therefore, is one of profound duality. Frederick O'Neal spent his public life championing the visibility and dignity of black Americans on stage and screen, while privately navigating the immense weight of his own invisibility. He secured a future for generations of artists, ensuring their stories could be told fully and freely, even as his own most intimate story was one he could never afford to share.